Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's start sit video for week 6. Again, this is the bye week, so make sure you guys do have anybody that's on their buys on your bench replaced with somebody. But if you're maybe debating on which players you should have in your lineup, that's what you're here for. So why don't I go ahead and get into today's video? As always, I'm gonna give you my top starts and sits for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. Let's go ahead and start with those quarterbacks. My top start of the week, I'm going to go with Kirk Cousins against those Miami Dolphins. That Dolphins defense has been letting quarterbacks throw all over them in the first 5 weeks of the NFL season. When you look at the numbers in terms of fantasy, they are tied for the second most allowed points per game against quarterbacks this season, allowing 22.5. Xavier Howard, their best cornerback, is banged up right now. They're hopeful that he will be back this week against the Vikings, but even if he's back, you got to probably consider he's going to be less than 100%. Maybe not, even if it's 99%, 1% will be a big difference against like a guy like Justin Jefferson per se. So yeah, if there's a week to stream Kirk Cousins, I think this is the week where he's going to get you one of his ceiling games and potentially win you your matchup this week. My other top start, I'm going to go with Tom Brady against those Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers defense is far from what it once was. It's not that vaunted Steelers defense of the past, especially with TJ Watt out of the lineup. Looking back at last week, we saw what Josh Allen did against that defense. And I usually do cut-ups from the Colts games from the coaches film on Monday nights. But since the Colts played last Thursday, I already knocked that out last Friday. So I was bored on Monday. I decided to look at this past week's games and do some cut-ups. I decided to look at Josh Allen. Yeah, Josh Allen lit him up, but literally his wide receivers were running untouched because that secondary is not that great in Pittsburgh. This is one of those games where you could see Tom Brady put up over 300 yards and get you like 2 or 3 touchdowns. Now, as far as Pittsburgh in terms of fantasy, they're allowing 20.4 points per game against quarterbacks. That's the 6th most across the NFL. So yeah, if there was ever a game where we could see the old version of Tom, I know, like, I'm not saying like an old version of Tom Brady, but he definitely has not been putting up those consistent fantasy numbers for you. And I think this would be the week that he can get that job done. My top sits, this guy, listen, you're probably going to play him, right? Justin Herbert against the Broncos, especially considering where you likely drafted him, especially considering his level of talent. And he's just not a guy you want to necessarily leave on the bench. But if you play daily fantasy football on FanDuel or DraftKings, Underdog, wherever you guys do play, I wouldn't play him in a daily fantasy league. Denver, they have their issues on offense, but it's not on the defense. They have one of the better defenses in the league. In terms of fantasy, they allow the 3rd fewest amount of points per game against quarterbacks, only giving up 10.3. So like I mentioned, if you're in a redraft league, I understand you're probably going to play Herbert, especially with being a bye week. Maybe you can't hold 2 quarterbacks on your roster. So if you do play him, temper your expectations, but I definitely would avoid putting him in any of your DFS lineups this week. My other top sit would actually be Zach Wilson against the Packers. Zach Wilson has been back for the last couple weeks. He's been a nice, decent streaming option for people that do stream their quarterbacks. But if you're looking at streaming him again this week, I would look for other options that are out there on the market. The Packers, their defense is not as great as I thought it would be entering the season. But when you look at what they're doing against quarterbacks in fantasy, they're only giving up 12.5 points per game. That's tied for the 7th fewest amount across the league. So even though there's a potential of maybe like a kind of a shootout game between him and Aaron Rodgers, if you look at the numbers, and I believe this, I should have known this, I think this game is in Green Bay, so he's on the road in Lambeau Field, so I could definitely see a rough outing coming for Zach. So like I said, if you want to look at the market, see if there's better quarterback streaming options for you this week over Zach Wilson, I definitely would recommend it. So again, my top starts, Kirk Cousins against those Dolphins, Tom Brady against the Steelers. My top sits, Justin Herbert against the Broncos, and Zach Wilson against the Packers. Moving into the running backs, my top start, This might be a sneaky flex play for people, but I think Melvin Gordon against the Chargers. Now, I know he's played the Chargers a lot of times since he's left that organization, but this is kind of a revenge game factor. You know, he did start his career with the Chargers. And then when you look at what the LA, God, you really can't say LA, but because there's two LA teams. But when you look at, that's another tangent I could go on. But anyways, if you look at what the Chargers have done in terms of against running backs, I mean, look what Nick Chubb did last week. Literally ran all over him. And I understand the Denver Broncos offense is very in flux right now. You don't necessarily where you could trust it. But if there's everything that they can get back on track is maybe getting a running game going against a weak rushing defense and then feed in off that running game into the passing game for Russell Wilson to try to get him back on track. But that being said, though, the Chargers are giving up 25.8 points per game to running backs in fantasy football this season. That's the most allowed. So even though Gordon has had his struggles, the Broncos have had his struggles. He's a guy where if you want to slide him into your flex and maybe gamble on him hitting a ceiling play this week, that's where I would go with him. My other start, this one might be kind of obvious, not necessarily obvious because of his talent or anything, but mainly because of a situation that popped up. But Romandray Stevenson against the Browns. If you guys do not know, he's been splitting reps, obviously, with Damian Harris. Damian Harris hurt his hamstring last week, and it does sound like Harris is going to be out for the foreseeable future. It sounds like a multiple week injury. I'm not sure if he'll be out like on IR, but it does sound like he's for sure out this week, if not into like 2 or 3 weeks. So that's going to be Romandray Stevenson's season to play him definitely in your lineups. And this is a week to take advantage of not only the volume of opportunity he's going to have, but the matchup as well. Cleveland right now, they are allowing 24.7 points per game. That's tied for the third most allowed points per game against running backs. So yeah, you're going to put Romandray in all the lineups that you have him in. And if you play daily fantasy, this is a screaming option to put him in your lineup as well. My top sits, Naji Harris against the Bucs. Now, if you guys don't remember, a few weeks ago, I recommended Naji Harris as a sit, and if you're in redraft leagues, I mainly said it's a temper your expectations play because you spent a first round pick on him, and you know with you spending that value on him, it doesn't make sense for you to leave him out of your lineup. But everything is going against him. Where even if you spent that first round pick on him, I understand there are buys right now, and you might be forced to play him, especially because where you drafted him. But if you could afford to leave him on the bench, I would honestly consider it. First of all, they're going against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's one of the better rush defenses in the league. In terms of fantasy, though, they only give up 13.1 points per game. That's the third fewest amount across the NFL. And then Mike Tomlin came out today and said Jalen Warren, the backup running back for Pittsburgh, is going to start getting more touches in the backfield. Not only because he's looked good with his touches, but also Naji, remember he had this like mysterious foot injury. I believe it was a minor Lisfranc injury back in the preseason. Maybe that injury was actually more serious than what he was trying to lead on, and it's carried into the season where it's hurting his impact on the field. So not only he's maybe playing a little less than 100%, he's got a rough matchup, and he's got a rookie that's probably going to start cutting into his touches if Mike Tomlin sticks to his word. So, man, if you can afford to leave Harris on your bench, I definitely would this week. My other sit, Miles Sanders against the Cowboys. Now, this is a one where if you have a better option, play him, but you might have to just temper your expectations. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys, like I always try to do with if I own a player in the league and I say a sit, it's going to be, and I'm still going to possibly play him. It's a temper my expectations play. But yeah, I'm in a 14-team league, and I have a couple running backs on bye, so I'm playing Miles Sanders in that league, so I'm tempering my expectations and hoping for the best. But man, he's going against the Dallas Cowboys defense that's been phenomenal in the first 5 weeks of the season. And then when you look at what they've done against running backs in terms of fantasy, they're only giving up 13.5 points per game. That's tied for the fourth fewest amount across the NFL. So based on the matchup, like I said, I'm going to personally play him in a league or two that I have him on my teams. But like DFS, I'm going to avoid him. So yeah, if you're looking to play Miles Sanders in DFS, avoid him. If you have to play him because of buys and stuff within your redraft and your dynasty leagues, I would just temper your expectations this week. So again, my top starts, Melvin Gordon against those Chargers, Romandray Stevenson against the Browns, and then my sits, Naji Harris against the Bucs, and then Miles Sanders against the Cowboys. Moving into my top starts. Here's another name. Obviously, this guy was a lot higher drafted than a Melvin Gordon, but let's just say he's been somewhat of a disappointment in terms of fantasy. That's DJ Moore against the Rams. The reason why I think he's a good play this week, definitely a sneaky play in DFS where I don't think a lot of people are going to be playing him, is because we got PJ Walker that's going to be the quarterback. Baker Mayfield's hurt. PJ Walker and DJ Moore have produced before. So there is somewhat level of chemistry between the quarterback and this wide receiver. Now that their head coach is fired, who knows what we're going to see out of the offense, but if there's one thing I can bet on, they're probably going to actually be more of a push towards getting the ball in the hands of Moore, especially when he's a veteran that you just paid a big contract to back in March. And then when you look at the matchup, the Rams, they have allowed the 5th most allowed points per game against wide receivers. They've been giving up 26.6 points per game. So I think there's a potential ceiling play here with DJ. And, the Rams offense is a mess, but this team just fired their coach. So I'm under the assumption that it's a get-right game for the Rams, meaning their offense is going to get back on track and score a lot of points. What does that mean? The Panthers are going to about to throw the ball a lot, and that will give you plenty of opportunity for DJ Moore to have a great game. Moving into my next starts, I'm going to go with, now, again, I try not to list obvious names. Like, I'm not going to list Justin Jefferson. You're going to play Justin Jefferson, right? But his other counterparts in Minnesota, Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne, especially in a deeper league or like DFS, KJ Osborne might be a sneaky play against those Dolphins. I don't want to reiterate about everything I said about Kirk Cousins, about how Miami's defense is not that great defending the pass. Their cornerbacks are banged up, and it's a kind of a weaker part of their defense right now. And then when you look at the numbers, they're allowing 26 points a game. That's the 6th most highest amount across the NFL. So yeah, it's a great matchup. If you got Adam Thielen, I think he's going to get into the end zone this week. And then, man, if you're in a deep league or you play DFS and you're looking for maybe a cheap option to play, I think KJ Osborne might be a sneaky play this week. My others top sits, going with Mike Williams against the Broncos. Kind of like I said back with Justin Herbert. Denver Broncos have a very great defense. They got that young corner, Patrick Surtain II, who's more likely, we'll have to see if Keenan Allen's going to play this week. Man, at this point, I don't know when he's going to come back. So that's why I did not list him. Even if he comes back, he's coming off that, a groin or a hamstring injury. I wouldn't necessarily want to rush him to play him in the lineup. So if he does, I would avoid playing Keenan Allen. But the guy that has been in the lineup over the last few weeks, Mike Williams, I would avoid playing him this week for all the reasons I said. And then when you look at the numbers, the Denver Broncos defense has only given up 14.1 points per game to wide receivers. That's the fewest amount in the NFL. So if you have Mike Williams, I think this is the week you want to leave him on your bench. My other sits, going with the trio down there in Duval County, Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones Jr., and Zay Jones against the Colts. I have multiple reasons. First of all, let's look at the numbers. The Colts are only allowing 15.3 points per game against wide receivers. That's the 2nd fewest amount. They got Stephon Gilmore back there. Julian Blackmon looks like he will be back. They got a nice secondary, and they got a good defense. I understand they're just like the Broncos, right? The offense completely stinks right now for the Colts, but when you look at their defense, it's a great defense that can get after the quarterback, and they can eventually start creating these turnovers as well. Now, looking at these wide receivers too for Jacksonville, it's kind of been like a very up and down situation. Christian Kirk was kind of consistent to start the season. Then he kind of disappeared last week. Marvin Jones had the big game last week, but then it was Zay Jones just a few weeks ago. So it's I think with these Jaguars wide receiver, I think Christian Kirk's a guy where, yeah, you probably play him because he should be seeing the same amount of targets, but I would temper my expectations with him. But Marvin Jones Jr. and Zay Jones, I feel like we're just never going to know when one of those guys are going to go off. They'll get the targets, but it seems like it's hit and miss with these guys. And then, so since it's so hit and miss with the Jaguars wide receiver, and then you look at the Colts and what they have allowed against wide receivers in fantasy, I think this would be the week to avoid playing those three in your lineup. So again, my top stars, DJ Moore against the Rams, and then Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne against the Dolphins. My sits, Mike Williams against the Broncos, and then Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones Jr., and Zay Jones against the Colts. Moving into my top starts and sits, My top start of the week, I'm going with Zach Ertz against the Seahawks. Obviously, for multiple reasons, he's going to get the targets from Kyler. He's going to either be the second or third most targeted person in the Cardinals' passing attack. And now, I do believe this number is skewed because of what Taysom Hill did against the Seahawks last week. But they were one of the top 5 teams prior to this last week. But in terms of the numbers, the Seattle Seahawks are giving up 20.1 points per game against tight ends. That's obviously the most across the NFL. But again, that numbers is skewed for what I will be honest, that's definitely skewed for what Taysom Hill did to them. But they were like in the top 5 or 6 of points allowed per game against tight ends entering last week. So they've struggled to cover the position. I kind of can see this being like a sneaky shootout type of game too. So this is definitely a week I think you should definitely have Zach Ertz in your lineup. My other top start, Colts might be pretty good at defending wide receivers, but they've struggled to put people on tight ends, and they've been able to produce against Indianapolis. And so with that being said, I think Evan Ingram against the Colts might be a sneaky streaming option at the tight end position. When you look at the points per game allowed, the Colts are giving up 10.8 points per game. That is the 4th most across the NFL. The last time that these two teams played, Evan Ingram was the second highest leading wide receiver. Trevor Lawrence was targeting him. It was basically Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram that had good games against the Colts the last time they played back in September in week 2. So if there were guys that are going to repeat that success, I could see that being definitely Evan Ingram. The Colts have kind of struggled to cover the tight ends, especially with Shaquille Leonard out of the lineup. So if you were looking for a roll of the dice, because we all know tight end, if you don't have Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce, tight end has been a roll of the dice this season. So if you want to look at the matchups and who's been struggling to defend tight ends, maybe you try to put Evan Ingram inside your lineup this week. My top sits, I'm going to go with Hayden Hurst against the Saints. The Saints have been one of the stingier defenses against tight ends this year. They're only allowing 3.1 points per game to the position. That's the 3rd fewest across the NFL. And then when you look at the Bengals offense, we really don't know who's going to go off on any given week, it feels like at this point. So when you look at the matchup and not seeing any consistent, producer within that passing attack, I think this would be a week to avoid Hayden Hurst. My other sit, I'm going to go with Dallas Goedert against the Cowboys. Like I mentioned earlier about Miles Sanders, those Cowboys are playing really great defense right now. And they've been one of the better defenses across the NFL. And we'll see if that can continue as we progress through the season. But when you look at what the Cowboys have done against tight ends in terms of fantasy, only giving up 3.2 points per game against tight ends. That's the 4th fewest amount. I know Dallas Goedert might have gotten drafted in those mid rounds for you, but at this point, it's a roll of the dice of whoever you play. But you may want to start looking at these matchups and just start streaming whoever has the good matchup. And unfortunately, Dallas Goedert does not have that matchup for you this week. So again, my top starts, Zach Ertz against the Seahawks, Evan Ingram against the Colts, and then my top sits, Hayden Hurst against the Saints, and then Dallas Goedert against the Cowboys. So yeah, this is this the week 6 starts and sits for you. But if you guys have any questions, people that maybe you could pick up and start, or guys that you're debating between in your lineup, as I always say, get in my comment section, shoot me a question. You can get on Twitter, shoot me a DM, you can text me if you got my number. And as always, like this video if you enjoyed today's video. Subscribe to my channel so you can always keep up with any of the latest content I post on my YouTube channel. Go follow all my social media platforms. You can follow me at Cody Talks NFL. With that being said, I'm going to get off here. You guys enjoy your day. Peace out.